All right, here we are at the beginning of our next unit. We're going to be learning about evolution and more specifically, natural selection, which is the process in which life evolves. So, as you all are hopefully well aware, what we've talked about before, Earth is not the same as it was when it was first formed, right? It took forever to even get like cells and bacteria and then multicellular things and then things with like bones and plants and things that lives on the land, right? So Earth has changed and that has happened because of evolution, okay? And natural selection is the process by which this change actually occurs, okay? Um, I'm sure you've all heard of Charles Darwin. He is credited with coming up with the theory of evolution. But you should know that there are other scientists working on it at the same time. He just kind of happened to be the first one to publish, but there were other people with similar ideas. So he was just kind of the lucky one to get out there first, but he wasn't the only one. Okay. So Darwin had basically four main points, and this is a foundational thing of natural selection. So this is super important, these four. So the basic idea is that number one, there is variation, natural variation in any population. Okay. Number two, there are more babies born each year than can survive. Okay. Kind of sad to think about, but it's true. Number three, because there are more babies born, we're going to have some kind of competition for resources. That could be for food, for habitat, for mates, any type of thing like that. Okay. So we've got some differences. We've got more babies born than can survive. And so those babies are going to be competing. And as it turns out, depending on the given time, certain traits, certain variations, okay, we call those adaptations, are going to help certain individuals outcompete the other ones and survive better. And if they survive, they're going to live to reproduce. And when they reproduce, they're going to pass on those genes to their offspring. And then their offspring will have those traits that helped them survive. Okay. So those are the four main parts. Very important. So as it turns out, you're only considered to be evolutionarily successful if you reproduce, because as far as evolution is concerned, you got to pass on those genes, you got to pass on those traits to your babies. Okay. So if you don't reproduce, you are a failure as far as evolution is concerned. All right. Because you got to, otherwise those traits, those genes don't get passed on. Okay. So I want to go back to that number four. The individuals with those traits that are beneficial for survival are more likely to survive and reproduce, and they pass them on to their offspring. So sometimes we'll think, well, oh yeah, obviously that thing is good. Not necessarily. Some adaptations might be helpful for an individual at that time, but later on might not be so helpful. It all really depends on the environment and what's going on and like what the weather is, what the predators are, what the food is. And so one thing that might help something right now in a couple generations, nope, might not help them anymore. So it's not necessarily saying that a variation or an adaptation is good or bad. It just might be helpful at that point in time, but it might not be helpful for all time, if that makes sense. So where do we get this natural variation, right? Our first thing with Darwin's four things is that we have to have natural variation in population. So where does that come from? Most of it comes from DNA mutations, and we automatically go mutation equals bad. But mutation doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Sometimes mutation just means it's going to be something different, right? So mutation could just cause, probably our eye colors could have come from different mutations, right? A blue eye color versus a brown eye color isn't exactly good or bad. It doesn't necessarily help us survive differently, right? Okay, so we get some of our variation from DNA changes, and we get a lot of variation because of the fact that a lot of individuals do sexual reproduction, right? So you're getting different combination of gametes, even from brothers and sisters, and meiosis is creating all those different gametes too, right? So that's where most of our variation in our population comes from. These variations can be beneficial to perhaps help something survive predation, right? So some things like zebra stripes, actually lions, which are their main predators, see in black and white. And so zebra stripes being black and white, that helps the zebras blend into the background grass. And then also when all the zebras run together, all those stripes make it hard for a lion to pick out an individual zebra. Okay, so that's just a trait that could help zebras live in a lion-based environment. But in a zoo, if there's no lion, having stripes doesn't really help that zebra, does it? Right? Cheetahs are very, very fast. That can help them catch their prey. Right? Things like hot pepper, right? Hotness is supposed to be a spiciness, things like that, supposed to help predators not want to eat it, because if they eat it, it's going to hurt their mouth, right? Same thing with things like horns. It's going to protect the plant so that it doesn't get eaten by, critters that like to eat plants. Their monarch butterflies are taste bad because of their food. And so when birds eat a monarch butterfly, they're like, ew. Well, guess what? There are other butterflies that have developed coloration that look like monarchs, and so birds leave them alone because birds assume that they're going to taste bad. Okay, so these are all adaptations that might help an organism survive being predated upon, or might help them become a better predator, right? There's also some variations that can help physiologically. So if you remember back when we read our book about survival of the sickest, remember how having high iron in blood allowed some individuals to survive the plague? Okay. Or remember how having high blood sugar lowers the freezing point of your blood, which is helpful in an ice age, right? So these are physiological adaptations. There is this fish in the Antarctic that actually had a variation that allowed it to produce an antifreeze protein in its blood, which is pretty cool. So like then it could live at colder temperatures. There are also some variations that can help certain animals get a mate, right? So if you've seen Planet Earth, like the birds of prey, they've got these bright colorations and these dances that help them attract a mate. Things with antlers, they can battle, and that can help to attract a mate. Coloration in birds helps attract a mate. Lions' manes can help attract a mate. Elephant seals will fight in order to get nesting territory and in order to get females to come and mate with them, right? Okay, so more on those elephant manes. A darker mane females are attracted to. As it turns out, darker mane ends up correlating with higher testosterone levels, which actually leads to better sperm count and fertility, and leads to better nutrition and health, and makes them have more muscles and be more aggressive, which is helpful for lions, right? So a female would want to pick a lion with that darker mane, but darker manes are also going to be hotter. And if you're living in like Africa, that darker maned lion might have a better chance reproducing, but it's also going to be a lot hotter, which, is going to be, a cost, there's a cost benefit situation here, right? So this is a variation that could help a lion get a mate. You should also know that the environment has a huge impact on evolution. So if we look here, these are peppered moths, okay? Back in Great Britain, in like the 1800s. This is what the trees looked like, and peppered moss lives on these trees that are covered with lichen. So obviously, if you're a light colored moth, you're going to blend in here, and the dark colored moths are going to stand out and get eaten. But then the Industrial Revolution happened, and the trees got covered with soot and looked like this. So look at what butterfly stands out now. Now this one is going to be eaten easier. So as you can see, being a light or a dark colored moth, that variation in and of itself isn't necessarily good or bad. It depends on what's going on at that time. If you were a moth alive in the 1800s, having a light coloration would be good. 1900s, light coloration would be bad, right? So these variations that help you survive can change based off of what generation you are and what's going on in the environment. Also think about like bacteria evolving to be antibiotic resistant, right? They're responding to their environment and changing and evolving. If there isn't a nice diverse gene pool, right? If we had all light colored moths and the Industrial Revolution happens, the moths might have completely died out, right? So if we don't have a diverse gene pool, it really puts that organism in potential of possible extinction. Okay. This is going on with the cheetahs right now. A whole bunch of cheetahs died in the Ice Age, and then they've been hunted and poached a lot, and their habitat has been built on by humans. And so right now, cheetahs are very genetically similar. Okay, they're 99% the same. It's almost like they're all identical twins. So any one little change could possibly wipe out all the cheetahs. Oof. Okay. Obviously, not only do humans have a big impact on like taking away the cheetahs population, but we can also have other impacts on evolution. Okay, we move species around where they've never been before. This is a brown tree snake, and it hitched a ride on a boat and it got brought to some new islands. And so now that lizard, or sorry, that snake has now wiped out a whole bunch of lizard and bird species on those islands because it was a brand new predator that didn't used to be there before. Lionfish, they're pretty cool looking, okay, but they're native to like Southeast Asia, Indo-Pacific seas, and now they're showing up in the Bahamas because people probably released them from their fish tanks. And so because they have no predators there, they're able to go and they're decimating coral reefs right now. It's really, really bad. Okay, so we are affecting evolution in these places by either accidentally or on purpose moving different organisms around. We also do what's called selective breeding. Right, we breed dogs and cats and things to make these new things like a labradoodle or all these things, and those weren't there before. So we are actively changing the breeding, depending on different plants and how we've bred wild mustard. We can get kale, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, all from that same plant. Humans have done that, right? We've changed how plant generations have come about. So those are some of the main topics. General idea about evolution, natural selection, adaptations, different things that could be advantageous, and how humans have affected evolution. Here's where we are in the textbook. Make sure to check it out. It's very helpful.